The Lindbergh Kidnapping. Although the kidnapping and murder of Charles A. Lindbergh, Jr. occurred many years ago, the world still remembers the tragedy vividly. Few people remember, however, the specific facts in the case as they unraveled during the 2 years following the kidnapping. Many people, in fact, wonder if the case was ever completely solved. Was the German carpenter Bruno Richard Hauptmann really the man who kidnapped and killed the Lindbergh baby? To answer this question, the FBI once more opens its mammoth file on the Lindbergh case, containing over 83 volumes, and reveals the principal facts from the day of the kidnapping on March 1, 1932, to the final arrest and conviction of Hauptmann. Little did the wife of the world-famous aviator Charles A. Lindbergh realize as she tucked blond, blue-eyed Charles Jr. into his crib on that fateful evening in March 1932 that this was to be the last time she would ever see him alive. She fretted about the cold which tormented the 20-month-old baby and tenderly drew the warm blankets about him to fasten them down snugly with safety pins. The nurse had carefully locked all the windows in the nursery except the north window, directly opposite the crib, which was left open for proper ventilation. The young mother lingered in the doorway, taking one last look at the sleeping child before she snapped off the light, plunging the pleasant little room into darkness. It was 7:30 p.m. Colonel Lindbergh arrived home shortly afterwards, and the happy couple settled down after dinner to enjoy a quiet evening at home. It was almost 10 p.m. when the first shadows of the impending tragedy loomed over the Lindbergh home. Colonel Lindbergh had been looking over some papers in the living room when the frightened voice of Mrs. Lindbergh called to him, asking if he had taken the baby from its crib. Dashing up the stairs past his wife and the baby's nurse, he switched on the nursery light. The crib was empty. Only the crumpled blankets bespoke its former occupant. As the anxious father searched the room frantically in a wild hope that his son had perhaps climbed out of the crib and hid nearby, he discovered a note lying prominently on the windowsill. The crude scrawl read, "Have $50,000 ready. The child is in good care. We warn you for making anything public or for notify the police." By 11 o'clock of that evening, the Lindbergh home at Hopewell, New Jersey, ablaze with lights, was being searched from top to bottom by the authorities. The help questioned, and the startling news was being flashed across the country by radio, telegraph, and telephone. Extras, peddled by excited newsboys along the darkened streets of many cities, proclaimed in bold black type, "Lindbergh baby kidnapped. Charles Lindbergh, Jr. missing from Hopewell home." Meanwhile, the authorities were endeavoring to trace down every clue which might give some hint as to the identity of the kidnapper or kidnappers. It was determined that the kidnapping itself must have taken place sometime between 8 and 10 in the evening. Traces of mud were found on the floor of the nursery. An important clue, later to incriminate Hauptmann gravely, was a 3-section ladder found about 50 feet from the house. 2 sections of the ladder had been used in reaching the window, one of the 2 sections being split or broken during the descent. There were no bloodstains in or about the nursery, and examination failed to reveal any fingerprints. The household and estate employees, after being questioned, were investigated thoroughly, and all were cleared of suspicion. For 4 long days, while the kidnapper kept a grim silence, shreds of evidence were fitted together, slowly, painstakingly, until they formed a pattern which enabled the authorities to visualize the actual kidnapping. Sometime during those 2 hours, while the Lindbergh household was occupied on the ground floor, while Charles Jr. was sleeping peacefully in his crib, the kidnapper had placed the ladder under the nursery window and scaled it noiselessly. He had picked up the infant, clad in its one-piece coverall nightsuit, and after propping the ransom note on the windowsill, had begun the dangerous descent. The ladder had broken during that descent, causing the kidnapper to drop his precious bundle. Whether the child had been seriously injured could not be determined, since there were no bloodstains on the ground or along the side of the house.